Recently, I went to an estate sale in Waxahachie, Texas. This place apparently belonged to an avid video game collector. As you can see, they had quite a selection here, and most of these systems were $10 a piece. I ended up buying 2 original Nintendos and some games, but I also ended up with several of these little plug-and-play TV games that I bought for $1 a piece. Plus, I already had a few in my collection. For those that aren't familiar, these sort of games usually run on batteries and they plug straight into a TV or monitor, and they're completely self-contained. Some of these are designed to emulate vintage video games, but others are more similar to the arcades. There are probably 30 or 40 of these that have been on the market over the last 10 years. So I have like 9 of the more popular units, and I'm going to show you each one and tell you whether I think it's junk or treasure. I'm going to start with the Atari 2600 joystick. It was made in 2002 by Jakks Pacific and has 10 built-in games. The joystick very much resembles the original joysticks that shipped with the Atari 2600. So it does have some of the more popular games of the era, such as Adventure, or Asteroids, Centipede, Missile Command, and Yar's Revenge. These games look pretty close to the originals, but this thing does not actually have any Atari technology inside. Ironically, what it does have in it is one of these. Yes, believe it or not, it actually uses what's called a NOAC, or a Nintendo on a chip. It's a single chip that emulates the original Nintendo, and somebody spent some time coding these games to look very similar to the Atari versions. It's almost convincing, but not quite. For example, check out the victory scene here in Yar's Revenge. Now compare that to the authentic Atari 2600 version. Now, I give this unit credit because it's one of the first, if not the very first of its kind. However, it does lack a little bit of authenticity, but that's not even really the biggest problem with it. I think the biggest problem is that it doesn't really have any software outside of Atari. Every game on here is from Atari. There's nothing from Midway or Namco or Activision. Despite that, though, I am still going to give it a thumbs up. Next on the list is the Namco Pacman game. It came out in 2003 and was also made by Jakks Pacific. It only has 6 games on it, but unlike the Atari, all of the games on here are worth playing. So you've got Pac-Man, of course. Now keep in mind, this is not intended to mimic any specific game console, but it does mimic the original arcade pretty well. I've heard some people say that there are slight variances in the behavior of the ghosts and whatnot from the original, but I do not believe the casual gamer will notice. So it also has Galaxian, and Rally X, and Dig Dug, and lastly is Bosconian, probably the only game here that I don't personally care for. The joystick itself is actually built really well and can take a lot of heavy use, unlike the Atari joystick, and I definitely give this unit a thumbs up. Next on the list is the Commodore 64 DTV. It was made in 2004 by Mammoth Toys and DC Studios. It has 20 games on board. I could do a whole episode on this thing alone, so I'll try to keep it short. It starts off with a very 1980s BBS intro type look to it, with your selection of games. So this thing is a real Commodore 64 inside. Now what I mean by that is it actually executes the original code, so these games are more or less unmodified. That means they're extremely authentic. Another great thing about this is it has, the 20 games it has are actually all pretty good, important games that were very popular on the system. I won't show them all to you, but here are a few. This is Cybernoid. Impossible Mission.
Another visitor. Stay a while. Stay forever.
Which was always one of my favorites growing up, and I've never actually solved the darn thing, but it's still fun to play. Jumpman Jr., Pit Stop 2, unfortunately no way to do a 2-player on this one. International Karate, I spent many years of my youth playing this. Someday I may perform the music for this on my other channel. Here's Tower Toppler, Eliminator, Cyberdyne Warrior, Zynaps, Speedball, and Super Cycle. Now let me show you a neat trick. If you wiggle the joystick on power up, it will take you to a fake basic screen, and you can select several more hidden games such as Splatform or Minima. Also, you can get a real basic prompt with an on-screen keyboard. I imagine it would take quite a while to write any software using this mode. Now, this thing is actually designed to be hackable so that you can actually solder in a PS2 keyboard and connect up a Commodore disk drive to it, at which point it becomes a full-fledged Commodore 64 system, and then you can run any Commodore game on it you want. I definitely give this unit a thumbs up. Next up is the Atari Paddle game. It was made in 2004 by Jakks Pacific. It has 13 games on board. But keep in mind, all of these games are Atari 2600 games that were designed to work with the paddle. So I'll show you a few of them. So you get Breakout, Super Breakout, Circus Atari, Night Driver, the original Pong, although it's a single player, Warlords, although this looks too sophisticated to be the 2600, so I think this is from a later console, and Demons to Diamonds. So what can I say about this thing? Well, on the good side, the paddle actually is very responsive and it works really well. The problem is mostly just the game selection. There weren't really that many games on the Atari 2600 that supported the paddle, and even fewer that were actually any good. As a result, I'm giving this one a thumbs down just for the software aspect of it. Next up is the Sega Genesis. It was made by Radica in 2003. It has 6 games on board. It looks like a tiny Genesis console with a pretty nice little controller attached to it. Now, this thing is extremely authentic in that it actually runs the original Genesis code, and so the games are unmodified, very similar to the Commodore DTV. In fact, if you take a look inside, you'll see a ROM chip here, and you can actually remove this chip and solder in a connection for real Genesis cartridges and play them on here. Now, unfortunately, from the factory, the audio sounds terrible on this thing, but in a previous episode, I showed exactly how to fix that, and I'll put a link to that down in the description. So, it has the original Sonic the Hedgehog, obviously a popular game for the console. Here's Golden Axe. The graphics here just scream of the 16-bit era, unlike all of the others I'm showing you here, which are from the 8-bit era. Here's Kid Chameleon, Altered Beast, Mr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, and Flicky. I definitely give this one a thumbs up due to the great construction, the authenticity, and the selection of games. Next up is the Space Invaders console. It was made in 2003, also by Radica. It has 6 built-in games. This thing is very well made, and as far as comfort goes, it's the easiest unit to play due to the larger base. The primary game is Space Invaders, and I'm not sure which system they're copying here, but it doesn't look like any game console, nor does it resemble the arcade version since the aliens are all the same color. It's very playable, but the graphics are pretty rotten. It would be one thing if they were emulating an Atari 2600 or something, but they aren't. So the next game on the list is Lunar Rescue, which almost looks like it was from the Sinclair or something. It really isn't all that fun. The next game is Colony 7, which is sort of like Missile Command. Next is Quicks, which was always a favorite of mine on the C64, and this version is decent. I can play this for a while. The last game is Phoenix, which is ironically a clone of Galaga, which is a clone of Space Invaders, which is the primary game, and yet this one's actually better looking graphics and more fun to play than the primary game. So what do I think? Well, as much as I love the construction of this thing, I'm giving it a thumbs down based on the selection of software and the poor recreation of the primary game of Space Invaders. Next up is the Tetris game, made in 2003 by Radica. It has 1 game on board, which is of course Tetris. You can play 1 player, or you can connect the secondary controller and play 2 players. The graphics are good, the music is tolerable, and is the original Tetris soundtrack. So from a software standpoint, this thing's actually pretty good, but what really kills it is the controller. I mean, you know, Tetris requires a lot of left to right movement as well as a lot of rotation of the pieces, which is easy to do on a Game Boy or just about any console. These controllers are very stiff and require a lot of force to move them. and you have to rotate the knob to rotate the pieces. So I consider myself like a champion at Tetris. I could probably win some kind of tournament if I were to ever enroll. But as far as this thing goes, I can't play it very well at all. I'm giving this unit a thumbs down for the controllers. Next up is the Ms. Pac-Man game. This was made in 2004 by Jakks Pacific. It has 5 built-in games. The primary game, of course, is Ms. Pac-Man. It seems very authentic to the original arcade. There may be some slight differences, but the casual gamer will never notice. Here's Xevious. I used to play the arcade for this in a restaurant that my family frequented back in the 1980s. I would also say it's very authentic. And of course, here's Galaga. And here's Pole Position. Now, here's a funny thing. I could not figure out how to make my car turn. I thought there was something wrong with the game. But after doing a Google search, I found that you actually rotate the controller like a paddle. Although it seems awkward, it actually works very well, giving much better steering than using a binary-style joystick. So the game is very playable once you figure that out. The last game is Mappy, and I'll admit I've never heard of it, and I can't even figure out how to play it. But overall, at least 4 out of the 5 games on this console are classic games and very desirable, and the construction is also pretty good. So I give this unit a definite thumbs up. And last up is the Atari Flashback. So this is another one of those I could do an entire episode on this thing. Now let me start by saying there's actually at least 6 different versions of this. I happen to have 2 of them, the Flashback 2 and the Flashback 4. What I can tell you is that the first unit was a Nintendo on a chip. The second unit was a real Atari that ran the original code. In fact, this one can be modified to take original Atari 2600 cartridges, very similar to the Sega Genesis that I showed you earlier. From the Flashback 3 and newer, they're using some sort of ARM chip, I believe. However, I think they may be running emulation of the original code, which works for me either way because it's pretty authentic. All of the units can use the original Atari or compatible controllers, which is pretty cool. My Flashback 2 doesn't work. I bought it broken and I've been meaning to try to fix it. There's an exploded capacitor inside. I think somebody plugged the wrong power adapter into it. But I'll show you a few games from my Flashback 4. So here's Space Invaders. Now, what's weird about this is that it's not the 2600 version of Space Invaders. However, ironically, it is more fun and better looking than the one that came on the actual Space Invaders console I showed earlier. Just for comparison, here's the Atari 2600 Space Invaders. Now, here's Yar's Revenge and Gravitar. So here's the problem I have with all of these Flashback consoles. They give you, around 80 games on each one of these consoles, but 5 of them are pretty good games and 75 of them are just total garbage. Now, it seems crazy to me that they would produce this thing with 80 some odd games in there and yet leave out all of the games that more or less defined the console, such as Dig Dug, Donkey Kong, Frogger, River Raid, Galaxian, Montezuma's Revenge, Ms. Pac-Man, Pitfall, which is probably the most iconic game on the platform, or Pitfall 2, which is probably the best game on the platform, Pole Position, q-bert, Spy Hunter, or Xevious. So of all the most important and defining games for this console, they give you like 4 or 5 of them and then like 75 rubbish games. So as a result, I'm giving this system a thumbs down, except for maybe the Flashback 2 if you want to modify it to take the original cartridges. Well guys, thanks for watching. Sorry to have to rush through, but there were quite a few systems to cover. Now, if there's enough interest, I might come back and do a sequel and cover some more of these systems that I did not cover in this episode. As well as if there's enough requests, I might do specific episodes on some of the unique consoles that we talked about in the show.